Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Mustafa Ergun. Hi Mustafa, welcome back.
Hey Vasco, thank you.
So Mustafa, on Tuesdays we talk about teams, but as usual, before we dive into that, share with us what might have been the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master and why?
Oh, it's a hard question because I have more than one book, and if you don't mind, I would like to start with like a podcast before I get into the book's recommendation. Is that fine for you?
Go for it.
Yeah, great. So I'm truly saying that, this podcast is one of the great learning for myself because it is a great way to learn more from other people's experience. So, I enjoy a lot and I learn a lot. I highly recommend to everyone to, stick around with this podcast. So with that being said,
Thank you for your kind words, by the way.
thank you. So again, it's hard to pick one book, but I have two books for the listener today. So the first one is, the Fixing Your Scrum, which is written by Ryan Ripley and Todd Miller. So I specifically picked this book and I really like this book a lot. I went through a couple times because, most organizations say we are using Scrum, but my observation is that sometimes we are using the Scrum in poorly and such an ineffective way, So these books empowered me to understand the dysfunctions of the team or organizational agility and also provide, the practical solution to common problems. Sometimes I focus on my day-to-day a lot, but I don't see those anti-patterns. So, when I read this book, I realize, the different aspects of anti-patterns and hear those practical solutions. So that's the first book that I recommend everyone.
And by the way, Ryan Ripley, one of the authors of that book, also has a podcast, Agile for Humans. So definitely worth listening and learning from the people he also interviews. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Mustafa. And your second book was?
Yeah, my second book is my all-time favorite, I will say. The name of the book is How Will You Measure Your Life? The author is Clayton Christensen. I would say this book has a special place in my heart because it teaches me how to think about my life and the purpose of life, by sharing research and theories about success and failure. Again, this book doesn't give you an answer for what to think, but open many doors for you how to think. So it has 3 sections in the book. The first one focusing on finding happiness in your career. The second one is, finding happiness in your relationship. And the last one is staying out of the jail. So
that's a great title for a section in the book, yeah?
Exactly. At the end of the book, I admit that we live a life of integrity. That is that simple. Again, this book is equally powerful and I will say, universally applicable, especially as a Scrum Master, since you work with different people, work with different part of organizations. So I really enjoy a lot. So
absolutely. We'll put the link to those books on the show notes so that people can find them. Mustafa, now we turn our attention to teams and how sometimes they become their own worst enemy. So tell us a story of a team that you were working with and walk us through the steps, how that anti-pattern or behavior developed over time that ultimately led to problems.
Okay. I would like to approach with a different answer for this question to talk about one of the cultural anti-patterns that like the many organization face, and I'm talking specifically about the metrics. So like the team, organization, executives, managers, everyone want to see those metrics, and there are many different metrics out there. So let's be clear, metrics are essential, but it is more important than how you look into them. So I would say our focus should not only, like the focusing on the numbers that is going up and down. So, like and also we cannot compare the, like the teams based on those numbers, because it is like comparing apple and orange. So, let me share a real example with that situation and how we overcome with it. So I work with an existing team which join a new project. So at that moment, we know, and our goal was to bring a new line of business into the application. So we know what is the ask is, what the ask is, but we don't know how. We don't know how to build this, because like the technology was new for us, the players are completely different, and we have so many burning questions about how to implement what in that application. So as part of our experience with the new work, of course, we start to have refinement sessions, and like the time is very important for us. So while we are doing refinement at the beginning, I discovered that as part of our standard refinement session, we spent a lot of time on story pointing. So, but I realized that our estimates are not accurate, and we are spending a lot of time on those estimates, or those, like the story point conversation, without knowing much about the application. And then I realized that this is an additional pressure for my team members, because like they are new in the application, they have so many burning questions, and we are putting them in a
So
situation
what
that
you're saying is basically the team didn't really know what they were trying to estimate, and that's why it was so
exactly
hard to come up with some story point number for a story, because they really didn't know how to turn those ideas into reality in the context of their application, right?
exactly. So at that moment, I see that this is going to be an anti-pattern. Again, this is a specific base situation. then then we come up with the no estimate experiment. Like we just told the team that you know our focus is completely to understand this story, and to answer all those burning questions, and we just make it clear for everyone there is no stupid silly question, and all those questions are valuable. Like the let's focus on that part to understand the application, to try to answer all those questions instead of focusing on the story point, and let's spend our time effectively. So then we come up with that approach, but then one thing is missing with that, because when you are not estimating, you cannot see any of the like the metrics, or like the cross like the to see how things are progressing. Then we decide to add one minor thing with our experiment. While we are refining the story, at the end, when we feel comfortable with that task, we add one story point for each story to, to see the throughput, to see our overall progress. So with that, we had an opportunity to, like to monitor our burn down chart, to monitor different metrics and such. So this was an experiment, and it went really good for us. So I cannot say that this will work for all the project and such, but in our scenario, it worked perfectly fine, and we overcome that anti-pattern. So
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a couple of things that came to mind as you were describing that story. Very often we want to dive straight into refinement, even before we've understood what we are trying to achieve with the stories. Because very often the stories, well, typically one of two things happen with stories. Either they have too many details or they don't have enough details, right? And if they are just right, then fine. There's no question, we move on. But when they either have too many details or not enough details, what happens is that the team reacts to the story by trying to picture it in their mind. How will this happen in practice, right? Sometimes it's technology. Sometimes it's about how to test something. Sometimes it's about the dependencies that there might be and so on. And it sounded to me that, as you pointed out, that anti-pattern was that the team wanted to go straight to the end of the refinement, story pointing, rather than going through the refinement, which is, okay, no, let's break this apart. Let's, slice the story if we need to. Let's find the right level of detail for us to come on to an agreement as to what this story is about. Like, that's how I heard the story. Is that how you saw it, Mustafa?
Yeah, exactly. And also, like with that approach, in addition to what you mentioned, so putting less pressure on the team, and let's focus on the, like the actual, like the development and answer all those missing parts to make sure that we are all at the same page. So, so.
Exactly. And what you guys did, which is, okay, step back from the whole idea of the end of refinement, right? The story points. And let's spend more time in the middle of refinement, asking questions, trying to figure out how this might work or might not work, and so on. And you guys used no estimates, but in the end, it doesn't really matter whether you use no estimates or whether you end up story pointing in the end. But as long as you give the team enough time to explore the story, maybe there's a trick where you can ask, does everybody feel that they understand how to implement this, how this story will be implemented in the product, or some check to make sure that the team isn't confused anymore about how to get that story to reality. I think that's a very important lesson for me. It's like making sure that the team has a way to confirm that they understand the story. And very often, story points is not that way, right? Story point might be at best a symptom that people don't understand the story, but it's asking the questions and that interaction that we need to create in order to make sure that, everybody has had a chance to ask a question they had in mind.
Yeah, I think that the key part that you mentioned, and I completely agree, that's what we try to do is, like to create an environment that people freely speak up and, like to say what is missing or what it doesn't make sense for them, or, to have that conversation and to focus on that conversation. Like the conversation is the key part in the refinement and all other session in order to be a successful, team. So
absolutely. Focus on conversation. Very well said. Thank you for sharing that, Mustafa. Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.